The final component of this lecture is going to be talking about some of our common everyday tools that we use in online education, as well as ways to create accessible learning. And then the final component will be about mobile learning. So the first thing is email. We as educators are required to use email as a way to communicate with our students and the parents. The thing is, students today have grown up with email, whereas many of the teachers have been introduced to email in their teens, in their 20s, and it takes on a very different meaning. Email to students is a very informal way of writing, and many of us have, taken advantage of that informal style. Now, students believe that they're unfettered by the rules. They don't have to uphold the same rules of grammar, punctuation, communication, clarity that they would in normal speaking in the classroom. And that's really where you as the educator have to set those boundaries, because it's important for you to make sure your students realize that it is a form of information literacy. It's a form of, communication, and would they want to be given the kind of attention where they're not treated with respect or cordiality because their style is inappropriate? So in using email as an educational tool, you need to make sure that the rules and uses are outlined for your classroom, that etiquette is the key to proper communication, whether it's with the students or the parents. It's the old story of you get what you represent in yourself. And if you want to be considered professional, you present yourself in a professional manner, and the parent is most likely to do it. The student is more likely to do it. You need to follow school governance, and monitoring needs to be considered as well. Many of you in your technology assessments actually talked about email policies as the primary formal policy structure within your school. They didn't talk about networks, you talked about email. So get used to following those rules, and not only that, write in a formal style, and email will be considered a very equal form of communication as if normal speech was done. Now, the only problem you have with email is freedom of speech and allowing things to be permissible within the classroom. Email is a written document. You can hold a student accountable, but it can also be considered a creative outlet. So make sure when you are writing emails that it's very factual, to the point, and everything is documented. Every email should be stored. If you have a filing cabinet, I know this is going to be sounding like the worst thing in the world, but print your emails if it's a correspondence between a student and a parent, or a faculty member to a faculty member. Anything that can be held against you should be printed. It should be considered as if it's a regular document. So depending upon who your audience is, for example, if you're saying to somebody, let's go to lunch, it's one thing, but if you're telling a parent about their student's performance, you need to put in that student's file. There's no one's ifs or buts about that, because that email can hold you liable as the educator. So now let's move to the difference between content and learning management systems. Blogs and wikis are forms of content management systems because you're able to implement content freely, and it can be created in an unstructured format or a very structured format. It's really a storage repository where versioning is allowed and things of that sort, whereas a learning management system is a platform where you can provide different forms of content in a structured fashion. I've taught you how to organize an online learning environment in multiple classes. Having a syllabus, having a discussion, having a lectures area, having a tools and resource area. Those are all common components, but they're all brought together in a single folder or a single share of sorts, where everything can be collaborative for the teacher, where it's many students to one teacher, many students to many teachers if you have an assistant teacher, whereas a content management system is an asynchronous tool. There's a dialogue that happens in a learning management system, and Blackboard is an example, WebCT is an example, Moodle is an example. These are all tools where the teacher can facilitate a large group discussion using a single platform, whereas a content management system, each student and each educator has their own platform and has to create the knowledge individually. So that's really the difference between knowledge management, in the scope of individuality versus groupthink. And knowledge management is a really important e-tool. Now let's finally move on to accessibility. For those who are hearing impaired, some tools that you should consider are FM transmitters, speech-to-text systems, something like a drag and dictate. Believe it or not, using email or digital notes is a great way because students may not be able to hear what's going on in the classroom, but if they can see, it's just as strong. Making use of overheads for visuals, because students who are hearing impaired usually have better visual abilities. Change auditory warnings where there's not only a auditory format, say a bell, but you have a visual cue. So think of an alarm system in a school. You've got the blinking light, but then you've got the sound. You need to make formats that are not just one-tracked. It needs to be multimodal. Think it's closed captioning for the hearing impaired. That's a great example of how hearing impaired students can go ahead and be given the same cues as those who are the visual learners. And finally, we understand that's exactly how you inform the student. For hearing impaired, you go focus more on visual and more on text-based or tactile touching learning than doing, obviously, hearing-based learning. Flip side, someone who's a visual learner and has visual problems needs another format. So those closed captioning televisions are for students who are visually impaired who are legally blind. It can enlarge things. OCR, character recognition. If you've got a piece of text and you need to be spoken, you have the ability to speak it. Something like JAWS, drag and dictate. You can also do speaking of things. You have a refreshable braille display for someone who's completely blind. Then you've got screen magnification tools, and if you've noticed on a lot of tools, especially the Windows-based, Internet Explorers, Chrome, Firefox, you have this accessibility tools built into the web browser, so giving you that ability to not only speak the tools but enlarge the content, that's really important, and making those tools available. You don't want to make content all image-based. You want to make it as much text-based as possible because readers can't necessarily read images. They can read text, though. And finally, text-to-speech software. I can go on, but the truth is that a lot of the operating system on today's computers have that accessibility tool of the magnification as well as the ability to speak every single word that comes up on the screen. So I think it's important that you see that transformation as your students are trying to learn, that adaptability is possible. Now, for those with learning disabilities, dyslexia, neurological impairment, being emotionally disturbed, there are other tools, and I'm just going to generically say them. There's software programs to quote-unquote captivate them. Having electronic notebooks, is more of a reinforcement tool. Smaller word processors for younger students so that they can become acclimated before they move up to the larger tools. Variable speech control tape recorders, teaching the student at a very, very slow pace like this, or speeding up like I'm doing right now. Teaching the student to do, phonetics is great with, small tape recorders. Books on disc, books on video. These are great methodologies to go ahead and teach a student who has poor literary skills, and needs that extra push in order to go ahead and learn how to speak, how to read, things of that sort. There's multiple enforcement technologies of sorts. And finally, you've got, computer-aided, real-time translation for those who are ESL based. There are many school districts who have 30, 40 plus languages spoken. For example, the school district I grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey, announced a couple of weeks ago that there's 47 languages spoken in the school district. And their answer is, okay, we have ESL classrooms, but ESL is only good for a couple of languages. So having the technology that can translate the words is great, and that's something you should have available in your classroom. And if you don't have all these tools, that's very typical. But if you can get as much access to these tools as possible, it's fantastic. So that's it for this lecture. There's no more. If you have any questions about your assignment, by all means give me a call or email me. I will be more than delighted to spend as much time with you going over how to create those lesson plans, and hopefully you can integrate some of these tools learned in this lecture into that lesson plan, as well as some of the other tools we've discussed in previous lectures. I hope you're having a great week, and see you next week.